The history of the cochlear implant system dates all the way back to the year 1800. In 1800, Alessandro Volta first reported that electrical stimulation to metal rods inserted in his ear canal created an auditory sensation. He described this sensation as a boom within the head. In 1957, Giorgione and Eries placed a wire on the auditory nerve of someone who was undergoing surgery. They used this wire to stimulate the auditory nerve directly with electrical current, and the person reported a clear auditory percept. This observation motivated the search for treatment of profound deafness. In 1961, House and Doyle reported data from 2 adults with profound deafness whose auditory nerve was stimulated electrically by an electrode placed on and then through the round window and into the scala tympani of the inner ear. These individuals both reported auditory percepts. In 1964, Simons placed an electrode through the promontory into the vestibule and directly onto the modulus of the cochlea. Again, these individuals could detect changes in duration and had the percept of tonality. These observations fueled the push toward the development of functional permanent cochlear implant systems. The first single-channel cochlear implant was introduced in 1972. Over 1,000 people were implanted from 1972 to the mid-1980s, including several hundred children. In 1984, the Cochlear Corporation introduced the first multi-channel cochlear implant system. Cochlear implant current candidacy. Who is considered a candidate for a cochlear implant? A moderate to profound hearing impaired individual who receives minimal benefit from appropriate fit amplification that is word consistently is considered a candidate. Adult FDA criteria for a cochlear implant. Adults have to have a moderate to profound bilateral central neural hearing loss. They must also have less than or equal to 50% sentence recognition in the ear to be implanted and less than 60% or equal to 60% sentence recognition in the opposite ear. They must also have high motivation and appropriate expectations of what is to come from a cochlear implant. Children, pediatric clients, have different FDA candidacy criteria than an adult. For a pediatric client, they must have severe to profound hearing loss bilaterally. They must be 9 months of age, which is new from the FDA as of March 2020 for children who have a bilateral profound central neural hearing loss. They must also make little progress towards speech and language milestones with appropriately programmed hearing aids. They must also have realistic expectations on the part of the family of a cochlear implant. Cochlear implant past candidacy. In the 1980s, cochlear implants were recommended for postlingually deafened adults with hearing losses greater than 100 decibels and no discernible communication benefit from a hearing aid. By the year 2000, however, the FDA approval had extended to the implantable age down to 12 months and broadened the general hearing criteria. Current guidelines permit cochlear implantations in persons aged 2 years old and older with severe to profound deafness and in children 12 to 23 months of age with profound deafness. Guidelines for cochlear implant candidacy are given with the FDA approval of each system and are based on the participant criteria used for clinical investigation of the system's safety and efficacy.
There are 2 general components for the implant, the internal device and the external hardware. In the internal device, there is a receiver and an intracochlear electrode array. In the external hardware, there is a microphone, a speech processor, and a transmitting coil. First, sound travels to the ear and is recognized by the sound processor. The microphone on the sound processor picks up the sound and converts it into digital information. The information then goes to the coil and travels to the implant that's embedded in the skin. The implant then sends the digital sound signals to the electrode in the cochlea. The ear hearing fiber nerves inside your ear in the cochlea pick up on the sound signals and send them to the brain. Finally, the brain takes these sound signals and turns them into the sounds that are being heard. And that is how the implant works.
Having a cochlear implant installed can have many advantages and disadvantages. One of the major disadvantages is it not working after the surgery. They say the age to get it, whereas the most effectiveness is between the ages of 12 and 18 months. A disadvantage of having the surgery, it says, it can cause injury to the facial nerve that goes through the middle of the ear. It can cause risk of infection, blood collection at the surgery site. Just normal surgery risks. After the surgery, it also can destroy the remaining hearing in the ear that is implanted in. There are also some minor disadvantages, such as setting off metal detectors, the batteries dying, and can get the outer parts wet. There are also some advantages to having it installed, such as being able to hear the loud, medium, and soft sounds. You can make cell phone calls, watch TV, listen to music. Life gets easier, it seems like, because most people rely on hearing, such as going through the drive-thru and be able to order. Instead of just driving straight to the window, you actually can order at the machine. Many children can go to school without having to have an interpreter. You no longer need to read lips. Also can have some major life changes, such as being able to hear a fire truck when you're driving or a police car instead of having to watch your surroundings 24/7. Although it seems like the disadvantages overpower the advantages, that is not true. It just depends on the person and who they want to be, and if they want to be able to hear or if they want to just sign, doesn't matter.
The deaf world's opinion of cochlear implants is mostly negative. People who are deaf do not believe that they have disabilities that need to be fixed by technologies such as cochlear implants and hearing aids. Cochlear implants are a technology made by hearing, so it shows favor towards spoken and written language rather than signing and visual language. Another reason their opinion is negative is that cochlear implants may reduce deaf culture. If more people decide to get a cochlear implant, there will be less people involved in the deaf community, therefore diminishing deaf culture. And lastly, young children can't give feedback about the device, and they don't get to make their own decision about staying deaf or getting the implant at such a young age.
Hello. In this section, we will be reviewing some of the major points discussed throughout this presentation. You can follow along in the study guide. We'll start with the history. So the science of the cochlear implant can date back to the 1800s, when Alessandro Volta reported that electrical stimulation in metal rods placed in the ear canal caused auditory sensation. Studies and discoveries continued throughout the mid and late 1900s, and in 1964, perception of tonality and sound duration was first achieved. In 1972, the first single-channeled cochlear implant was introduced, and over 1,000 people were implanted with the device, hundreds of them being children. In 1984, the first multi-channel implant was introduced. Since then, many advances have been made and devices have been regularly improved. With these improvements, candidacy has also widened. Let's move on to candidacy. So the current guidelines for the cochlear implant are that an individual must have moderate to profound hearing loss, they must be at least 9 months of age, and they must receive minimal benefit from proper amplification devices, such as a hearing aid. The guidelines for each device or each system are established by the FDA, and it is important to note that adults and children have different criteria. Let's move on to the parts of the cochlear implant. There are two main components, the internal device and the external hardware. The internal device is made up of a receiver or a stimulator and an intracochlear electrode array. The external hardware consists of a microphone, a speech processor, and a transmitting coil. But how does that all work? Well, first, the sound processor recognizes sound using the microphone. The sound is then converted to digital information. Digital information is transferred to the transmitting coil, and then the information is sent to the internal device. The implant then sends digital sound signals into the electrode, which in turn sends these signals into the cochlea. The hearing nerve fibers in the cochlea pick up the signal and then send them to the brain. When discussing cochlear implants, there are many disadvantages as well as advantages. We'll start with the disadvantages. One of the biggest disadvantages is that the device may not work after a successful surgery. It may not help the person that has it. Outside of that, there's also many surgical risks. There is the risk of the facial nerve being cut, causing damage to the body, including paralysis to half the face. And then there's also just the general surgical risks, such as infection. Outside of surgical risks, there's a chance that sounds could be heard differently when using a cochlear implant. There is a potential loss of already existing hearing, and that doesn't even begin to start on all the minor inconveniences and issues and disadvantages that come with having a cochlear implant. Let's move on to the advantages then. First and foremost, I think the ability to hear is an advantage. Soft, medium, and loud sounds can be perceived by the individual. The individual is also able to participate and hear while participating in sound-heavy activities. Phone calls, movies, music, concerts. These are all activities that any deaf person can participate in regardless of hearing, but a deaf person with a cochlear implant can participate while hearing what's going on. Outside of fun, there's also the chance that a child can be involved in mainstream schooling without an interpreter or having a special class. With a cochlear implant, verbal communication skills will also improve over time. The deaf world opinion of cochlear implants is by a vast majority not great. Many members of the deaf world see cochlear implants as unnecessary. The idea behind this is that deafness is not something that needs a cure. It doesn't need to be fixed. Deafness is okay, and the cochlear implant is a cure for something that doesn't need it. When using a cochlear implant, there seems to be a focus on hearing cultures and hearing norms, saying hearing is the normal way to be. And so a large portion of the deaf world believes that the use of cochlear implants will start to alienate them from deaf culture. It's focusing and shifting more towards the hearing culture. Another big concern is focusing around young children. Since the age range for the cochlear implant is really low, you can be very young and get a cochlear implant. Young children often do not get the choice. It is made by the parents or guardians. So that lack of choice in itself is an issue. But even after the surgery, there's a chance that young children won't be able to provide feedback regarding any issues or problems that might arise after having the cochlear implant. All right, feel free to read these points over in the study guide. Thank you. Have a great one.